And so we got students asking, am I binary or non-binary? Am I bisexual or am I transgender? And on and on and on it goes. And some of y'all are thinking right now, Cam, should we be talking about this in church? I'm feeling a little awkward. Our country is experiencing the most extreme social change in the last 20 years in our history, and consequently right now is experiencing the worst mental health crisis in the history of America. I think in part because we are all in the grip of cultural forces that are aimed at influencing you almost never for good, almost always for money. Now you think about it. Who you follow on social media, shows you watch on television, TikTok, YouTube videos, Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram are all designed to do one thing: manipulate how you think so they can sell you stuff. Friends, so much of your perspective is shaped by who you choose to follow, who you allow to influence how you think, what you believe, and then consequently the choices you make. And Jesus actually talked about this a lot. But instead of using the word influencer, Jesus called us discipleship. This is discipleship. The idea that we're all being discipled, we're all being influenced by somebody all the time. And Jesus talked about this. He said, listen, students are not greater than their teacher, but the student who is fully trained will be like their teacher. Now, what is Jesus saying? He's saying that we are all becoming more and more like the people we follow because those folks are actually discipling us. And if that influencer that you're being discipled by is Jesus, praise the Lord. I mean, I certainly hope it is. But listen, if you're not being discipled by Jesus yet, I'm going to encourage you to lean into that just as soon as possible. Man, start attending Growth Track the first week of every month at every one of our campuses. Start reading the Bible every day. Start praying every day. Start building a relationship with Jesus. I'm not talking about religion. Religion is what Jesus came to free people from. I'm talking about you getting into a friendship and relationship with Christ. And if it would help, I would encourage you to follow me on Instagram. We're been reading through the book of Psalms for the last few weeks. We're starting to read through the book of 1 Corinthians. Tomorrow, I would love to have you join us. We're reading a chapter a day, and then I'm putting the verse that hits me on Instagram every day, and I hope you will read and you will do the same thing. And you know what? We can do this together, and if you're not a Bible reader yet, let's start tomorrow, okay? But you know, maybe the truth is you're being discipled by this world, and that's the way you like it. Because I'm telling you, this world can have a huge influence on you, whether you realize it or not. And it wants to. It really wants to. And friends, I'm just telling you, there is no area of our life that is more targeted and influenced by the worldly culture we live in than our sexuality. And sadly, the demographic that is most targeted by these influences are students. Our students are having to face issues that no generation in history has ever had to grapple with at such a young age. I mean, am I straight or am I same-sex attracted? Most kids don't realize that everybody struggles with a little bit of confusion when they're a middle schooler, and then by the time they're 17, 18 years old, they've grown out of it. They don't realize that. But boy, today, in our culture, man, their friends and their influencers, and sometimes their teachers at school are going, oh no, baby, this is all fluid. This is up to you. You get to choose what your gender is. You get to choose what your sexuality is like. You get to decide, and you should decide for yourself. And so we got students asking, am I binary or non-binary? Am I bisexual or am I transgender? And on and on and on it goes. And some of y'all are thinking right now, Cam, should we be talking about this in church? I'm feeling a little awkward. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Don't encourage me. This is going to get worse, all right? You're thinking right now, I ain't never been in a church and talked about this stuff like church. Well, if you think it's awkward for you, I got kids and grandkids listening to this message today, right? They're sitting right here. And I know that some of us are actually afraid our kids will hear this message because you fear they will disagree and leave the church. And can I just tell you, that could happen. That could happen. Happened to Jesus all the time. I mean, in the New Testament, there were always people who didn't like what Jesus had to say, and they got mad and left. And you know what? It happens right here too. But the good news about being as old as I am, and Lord knows I'm old, y'all. I remember when the Dead Sea was just sick. You know what I'm talking about? The good news about being around as long as I have been around is that, I've seen people get mad and leave the church, and then a couple years later come back and say, Cam, thank you for teaching us the truth on this issue. I heard what you said a few years ago, and I got mad and left because I just wasn't ready to hear it yet. But now I've walked down that path that you warned me about far enough to see what a painful place that path leads to, and that's why I came back home. Thanks for not waffling. Thanks for not lying to me and then calling it love. Now, if I can just be frank with you, I'm glad my kids are here. I'm glad my grandkids are here. I want them to know God's beautiful design for sexuality. I want them to know what Jesus thinks about sexuality because I want Jesus to be the biggest influencer in my family's life. Don't you? That's the guy right there. Now, I've always heard that if you want to grow your church, you should do a series on sex or the end times. And if you really want to grow your church, do a series on will there be sex in the end times, right? That's not what this series is about. Sex in the end time. This series is about you being influenced in your sexuality in our time. And let me tell you, Jesus has some really good news for us. Now, friends, this is such an emotionally charged issue. It's hard to address in a setting like this. I mean, really what I would prefer is just let's sit down over a cup of coffee and let's talk about this thing. But because it is such a difficult conversation, most churches don't address it at all. Dude, I grew up in a church, a good church, going every week. It wasn't until I got to college that I remember one message directly talking about what God thought about sexuality. And I grew up in the 60s. I was in high school in the 60s and 70s. Obviously, I was in high school for a long time, it sounds like. But anyway, But that was a sexual revolution, right? And all I heard about what God thought about sex was, save it for your spouse when you're married. And let me tell you, that is great counsel. I just didn't hear it very often, and that's all I heard. On the other hand, I had a buddy tell me that in the church he grew up in, he never heard one message in his life on sexual immorality because what he heard from his pastor and from the men who influenced him was, as long as you're taking care of your family, what you do sexually on your own time is your own business. They thought sex was a physical thing, and they separated that from spiritual things. God's about theology, sex is about physicality. So he grew up in this philosophical dualism, being influenced by people who thought you could separate biology from theology, which is what one writer calls sexual atheism. The sexual atheism. You believe in God, but you act as if sexuality is an area of life that God does not exist. You're okay with him everywhere else, just not in terms of sexuality. And if you are alert and awake, you have got to be able to see the chaos that just following your feelings and following your appetites and following the culture and following your peers is creating in our world today. Which is why Jesus came with really good news in this area of sexuality and every other area of life. So over the next few weeks, our goal is to give you that good news. In fact, one of the first times Jesus ever spoke publicly in the New Testament, he was asked to teach on a passage of Scripture. He took the scroll of the book of Isaiah and he read these words, famous words. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim that captives will be released, the blind will see, the oppressed will be set free. In other words, Jesus is saying, look, man, I've come to bring good news to people who feel oppressed and blind and enslaved and in prison. And I can't think of any area in our lives that has caused more people to feel blind and enslaved and in prison and without value than this area of sexuality. And Jesus says there's freedom from that. And there's a healing for anybody who will come to me. Now listen, look at me. You can learn that 3 or 4 divorces from now. Or you can learn it from Jesus today. And I would encourage you to listen to the good news that Jesus has for you, because a lot of people in this room have tried it the other way. And they would warn you off about that. I spoke to a woman in our church who told me that when she was in high school, she summoned the courage to tell her mother that her stepdad was coming into her bedroom at night and sexually abusing her. And her mother said, well, Sometimes you just got to take one for the team. And I'm telling you, man, that cowardly neglect crushed that young woman. I could not believe the parental malpractice that the girl had to live with in the abusive home where she grew up. But if you met her today, she is a godly woman who is beautiful on the inside and the outside. She's married to a godly man. They have a house full of godly sons because, everybody say because, she overcame sexual sin and abuse in her past by starting to follow Jesus. And Jesus put her on a healthy, holy path where she could find rescue and healing and peace and joy and marry a godly husband and raise a godly family and put all that trash behind her. Friends, life change is the gift Jesus wants to give, right? And that's what we're going to focus on for the next couple weeks.